Breaking news.
Drones that it says entered Polish territory. In the last few minutes, the European Union's foreign policy chief says they believe Russian drones were sent to Poland deliberately and that was not an accident. The incursion forced key airports in the region to close, including the main international airport in the capital, Warsaw. Well, in the last hour, reports that a residential building was struck in the east of the country, while a local prosecutor's office said drone debris has been found in the town of Sesniki. The president of Poland, Donald Tusk, posted on social media, last night the Polish airspace was violated by a huge number of Russian drones. Those drones posed a direct threat, were shot down. I'm in constant communication with the Secretary General of NATO and our allies. Let's bring in Siobhan Robbins, our Europe correspondent. Siobhan, great to have you on this. The comments from Tusk and Kallas in the last hour suggest this was an intentional incursion from Russia.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key question when we look at now how will Poland, how will its NATO allies react, because it is all about what was Russia's intentions. And so we have seen in the past, for example, drones enter by mistake airspace of Ukraine's neighbours. But what we're seeming to hear now from both the Polish Prime Minister and also Kaja Kallas from the EU is that they believe that this was a deliberate targeting, essentially, of Poland. What I think is key to say is that NATO have said at the moment they are not treating this as an attack, and that means that we're going to potentially see a different type of response. However, if it is deliberate test even of how NATO responds, how the West responds, then that is still an escalation from Russia's point of view. And so we would expect now conversations to be going on behind the scenes of how to react proportionately, how not to make the war escalate further, but also to make it clear, to draw red lines to Russia, to make it clear that this is not something that NATO and its allies are basically going to lie down and take. And we know that the Polish Prime Minister is talking to the NATO chief. We know that it's talking to allies. So what kinds of things could happen now? Well, they could trigger Article 4, NATO Article 4, which basically allows them to have consultations with other members when a country feels that its security has been threatened. And we saw that at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Poland and other members triggered it then. Poland also looked at triggering it later in 2022 when a missile came over the border and killed 2 people in a border town in Poland. But actually, that ended up being likely to be a Ukrainian air defence, so they didn't trigger it then. But that's one of the things. The fact that NATO is saying at the moment they're not treating it as an attack, that likely means that we're not going to see Article 5 triggered, which is this collective defence. You know, attack one, attack is an attack on the rest. But we will now likely see some really strong reactions, because this threat to both Poland and the Baltic states is something that NATO and numerous European leaders have warned against. You'll remember actually that the NATO chief has said repeatedly that in the next 5 years, potentially even less, that Russia could be in a position to attack a NATO country, and they are the ones that are most at risk. So they will want to be sending a clear message to Russia. What kinds of other things could they be doing? Well, obviously they'll talk about how NATO responds. The EU will look at how it responds. And we know that already they're working on their 19th sanction package. That's expected any time this month. So that's one of the other things we could see. But it's clear now that lots of voices coming out from Europe and from Poland's allies believe that this was an intentional escalation.
Well, there's some more voices